Thank you for the invitation, and my congratulations to the Institute for 100 years of great work and to the scientists here. I'm going to try to squeeze what was meant to be a 15-minute talk into the 10 minutes that the chair has given us. We'll see how much I succeed. So everything that I will show in terms of results is available from the website that's mentioned there. You can actually go and visually see them. There is visualizations, and you can download all of the data that are mentioned. So what I'm going to present is the work of a network of collaborators. We are over 1,000 people. I'm actually quite pleased to say that a number of scientists from the Institute are involved in this, and actually one of the scientists from Institute is on our core group that brings a lot of studies together. The circles that you see there are supposed to be colored, and the colors are not showing. And if the colors were showing, you would actually see, so that what those circles are showing change in prevalence of obesity in the world, and you can see the year at the top, and again, it's not fully showing the numbers because of the screen, but it's starting from 1975, going all the way to 2016, and the size of each circle is actually showing the number of obese people in the country, and it's plotted against urbanization. That very large circle at the beginning, that's America. The orange one at the bottom that's becoming large is China, and the third orange one at the bottom, that's actually India. And if you could see the entire graph on the screen, what you would see is that actually obesity is almost invisible in India until around mid-2000s, 2005 and 6. And then prevalence gets sufficiently high that you start actually seeing it in large numbers with a large population. So certainly a phenomenon that is no longer absent here. So just with that sort of visualization as the starting point, we are probably the largest study of non-communicable disease risk factors in the world. We work again with a network of over 1,000 researchers in different countries. We have brought data together going back to 1960s, over 2,500 studies with anthropometric information, measurement, and not self-reported height and weight on over 130 million people, measured over a period of over 4 decades in the world, and there is information on other things like blood pressure, diabetes, and you saw some of the results on height yesterday from my colleague, Dr. Andrea Rodriguez. So I won't be talking about height, I'll be talking about everything else, and that map is showing the number of studies that are in our database from different countries. So just to start, what this graph is showing is trends in mean BMI in a number of regions of the world, and the ones at the top are largely high-income regions, and the ones at the bottom, in this case, are some of the regions in India, and you're seeing the trends. In this case, for males, I'll show some of the other results for females, just to be able to not to repeat everything for both genders. So you can see that in the high-income world, BMI was going up starting from 1970s, and actually for children and adolescents, on average, it has plateaued in many regions of the world for about the past decade and a half. Very much the opposite is happening in Asia. The rise began, but it was slow. But again, starting around mid-2000, and especially for children and adolescents, the rise in BMI has accelerated, and it's become actually a faster increase. So again, a phenomenon that is very much there. If we look at this in terms of prevalence of different categories of BMI, which is shown here, all the way from clinical undernutrition in the case of adults here, less than 18.5, to overweight, which is in yellow, and various categories of obesity, all the way from BMI of greater than 30 to greater than 40, which is morbid obesity, all in the deep red. So undernutrition going down, but not nearly as fast as overweight and obesity are going up. So in fact, the rise in overweight and obesity is largely coming from the so-called healthy BMI range. And while undernutrition is to some extent persisting, similar story for children and adolescents. And here, in fact, the persistence of undernutrition is even more visible. That's the blue part at the bottom. That's less than 2 standard deviation from the median of the WHO reference population, whereas the rise in various categories of overweight and obesity, that's in orange and red, happening quite fast. This is happening at different rates in different countries. So each of these lines is one country, and the color is showing the region that they are in, and the clock starts from 1975 and it goes all the way to 2016, and you can see that in most countries in the world BMI is going up, but in some places, and in this case it's the red lines, which happen to be Middle East and North Africa, the green lines, which is Latin America, and the purple lines, which are some of the Pacific Islands, it's going up particularly fast, whereas in blue ones, which are typically European and other high-income countries, it's actually not going up as fast. So very much an acceleration in especially middle-income countries. So if we convert that to obesity and look at it again in a dynamic way in this as the time is going, you can see that places like North Africa, Middle East, like southern tip of Africa, like Mexico, are starting at really low levels, but it's going up really fast and getting to deep red by the end of it. In South Asia, in the Indian subcontinent, not changing much until the latest period that you can see that obesity is actually starting to show up again in the past decade or so. And this is very much the opposite of that. This is prevalence of underweight. And again, in parts of Latin America, it's virtually disappearing, whereas in Ezzati, is that this rise in diabetes prevalence, the pace of it varies across regions. So in fact, in Northern Europe, much of the rise in diabetes has been due to aging of the population. There hasn't been in Northern Europe a lot of rise in prevalence in every age group, and there is a whole sort of literature on why this is happening. Why is it that despite the rise in obesity, Northern European countries haven't had as much of a rise in diabetes after adjusting for their age, whereas in many other regions, and the Asian regions are largely on the second line, in the Pacific regions, there has been rapid rises, arguably faster than what we would have expected based on the BMI. And again, I won't get into the sort of questions of genetics and phenotypic drivers of that, and other issues, potentially health systems drivers of that. But varying rises in diabetes largely influencing Asia and the Pacific Islands. And again, to put this on a map, look at what happens to India on that map as time goes by, becoming higher and higher. And again, that's happening probably faster than what one would expect based on the rise in BMI. Similar story with Middle East and not as much in Northern Europe. And finally, blood pressure. So this is mean blood pressure, systolic and diastolic blood pressure. In fact, in the world as a whole, there hasn't been much of a change in blood pressure. On average, largely unchanged, despite the rise in body mass index. Perhaps even a sort of a slight downward trend on average in blood pressure, more so for women than for men. But this is really a construct of opposite trends in different parts of the world. In high-income countries, so what's called high-income Western countries and high-income Asia-Pacific countries, it's actually coming down quite rapidly. Whereas in much of Asia and again in Pacific Islands and perhaps in Sub-Saharan Africa, blood pressures are going up. So if we go to the similar maps that I've been showing you, if you look at this, so look at places like Canada and South Korea, which now have the lowest levels of blood pressure in the entire world, rapidly declining, starting at similar levels as elsewhere, but now becoming some of the lowest ones in the world, whereas especially Sub-Saharan Africa and Eastern Europe becoming the highest ones in the world, and South Asia, again going up, not yet as high as Sub-Saharan Africa, but quite high levels of blood pressure compared to elsewhere. So in many ways, if we were to take blood pressure and just plot it against national income, each of these points is showing one country. If we look at it in 1975, on average, blood pressure tended to be higher in a richer country than in a poorer country. By 2015, for women, it's very much an opposite relationship, and for men, largely an opposite relationship. So blood pressure is not really a situation of affluence, it's a situation of poverty now, and this actually mirrors situations that we see within high-income world, that blood pressure levels are much higher in the poor. And what does that mean for a number of people with hypertension or uncontrolled hypertension in this case? So this is showing total number of people with hypertension in the world, but divided into regions. And the regions in orange, again, are the Asian regions. So as blue is shrinking, as high-income countries are actually, despite rising population, reducing the number of people who have uncontrolled hypertension, in both East Asia, which is the dark orange, and in South Asia, which is the lighter orange, there is really an acceleration of the exploding of blood pressure rates. So, and I don't need the minute that I have left, I'll finish up this slide, which is that, so what's happened, if I were to summarize this, there has been a rise in body mass index in most regions, and except for where it's really high, and except in a few high-income countries, Japan and Switzerland, Italy haven't experienced much of a rise. So we are really entering a situation globally of severe obesity rather than just obesity. BMIs of 35 and above are becoming very common. And yet, there is a sign of plateauing in some of the high-income countries. But, and meanwhile, there's a persistent burden of underweight in South Asia and in Central East Africa. Diabetes is more mixed. There has been a global rise, although a fair amount of that has been due to just demography, more people, older people, some of it due to epidemiology, and it's only partially related to BMI, which really makes us ask, are we dealing with different diabetes phenotypes? And blood pressure has reversed between high and low income countries. And again, the website I showed at the beginning, www.ncdrisk.org, everything is there. And just as a sort of request here, if you are aware of or have studies that are population-based, we quite welcome to include it in the pooling study and expand the network of collaborators. Thank you very much.
Any question? David, you want to ask a question? No? If I may ask you, can you explain why you said that the obesity trends are plateauing in high-income countries? Is it because of the interventions that we have taken, or is it something more deeper?
Yeah, so it's flattening, especially in children and adolescents. There is a couple of phenomena. So if you look at the historical literature, historical sort of phenomena, year 2000 was actually when the term, around the year 2000 was when the term obesity epidemic was first used. In fact, the great Jerry Stamler was the person who we actually found, or the first paper that we found, somebody had used it, which was around the year 2000. So the issue of awareness became much more common in media, in public domains, and actually the situation that Catherine mentioned in the case of the UK, in terms of the affluent and the deprived group. So in the UK, affluent children are now experiencing a decline in obesity. So if the information is out there, and if you can use the information, I think the question that one of our colleagues asked, if you can use the information and if you can afford it, then you use it, and you do just fine with physical activity, with healthier food options. So it's the flattening is a combination of going up in the poor and going down, arguably, in the richest groups. And I think it's just a general diffusion of knowledge that has made it happen. It's different in places like Japan. Japanese women actually have had a decline in BMI to the point of being concerned about undernutrition. In Italy and Switzerland, perhaps cultural factors around food. So it depends on places.
My question is that, we have been talking a lot about one is epidemiology, and then we bring many other things, but we haven't talked about stress. Because when you brought the issue of poverty, and indeed, especially in the developing countries, and the difference between developed and developing countries' poverty is that, people actually eat a lot of junk food, but in developing countries, people don't eat that much of food. But of course, it's cereal based. I'm just thinking that one of the things we have discussed, probably not, we have to keep in mind that stress is one of the issues that we haven't been talking about. And with stress, the reason is that it's affecting your steroid levels, and steroid is actually affecting your blood pressure and other things. So maybe, I'm not sure, is this the right forum to talk, but even we are from the nutrition team, but we need to talk about also stress level.
So I'm not an expert in stress, and I don't know much about its physiology of how it works. But I think broad questions of social pressures, and it could be acting via poverty, job insecurity, and a whole set of other things. They may, and they probably have some direct physiological pathways. They also inevitably work in behavioral pathways. So I was talking to a colleague over the break that I have a reasonably secure, flexible job. And when my child is screaming, it's very tempting to actually sort of try to give them something that she'll be happy and be quiet. Make that for somebody who is working 2 jobs and at a really low wage, be it in a high-income country context or in low-income country context, and probably is about to lose their job, if a little bit of food is wasted at home, they can't really afford to replace it. They are not going to experiment with new recipes. They are not going to spend the time to cook because they don't have the time to cook, especially if they have been commuting for 2 hours. And you can sort of construct this chain that goes. So I think I would actually make this issue broader, which is that we are becoming better through mechanisms like taxes, levies, and regulations at taking away bad things. But we are still not very good at saying, how do you get the poor to eat healthy? And how do you actually enable them to eat healthy? In one place, it may be not having enough calories. In other places, it may be not having enough healthy calories to eat. And how do you actually change that? And I think, that's a sort of, again, much broader than the presentation that I gave, that what's happening within countries in relation to geography, to urban and rural place of residence, which are actually one of the things that, again, we are working with colleagues from the Institute on this question, in relation to social class taken broadly, and other factors, and how does nutrition play out in all of these. And again, some of it is financial, some of it is psychosocial.
Thank you, Dr. Majid. I think we have to stop there. Thank you very much.
One aspect to that, sir. Yes, sir. Sir, the changing of the blood pressure and high income group countries have reduced, and low income it is increasing, is said to be mainly because of access and treatment.
Yeah.
That's the deciding factor than anything else.
Yeah, treatment is a part of the story, but anytime I give this talk, somebody asks the question, is it treatment? Treatment is inevitably a part of the story, and high blood pressure treatment is now off patent and effective, and we should use it. But it's not, because it's not the whole story, because the decline began before even we had the first randomized trials of blood pressure, so blood pressure lowering drugs. And in fact, I gave this talk at a place, and somebody raised their hand and said, well, we are drinking juice, it's making us obese, but it's also giving us potassium that lowers our blood pressure. And I don't think we actually, I think that's an exaggeration of the fact, but the presence of technology has allowed us, for example, in the high-income world, for fruits and vegetables to be no longer seasonal. So a source of potassium, the presence of refrigeration has allowed us to use less salt for refrigerating, for preserving food, because we can actually put it in refrigerators. There is actually very good studies, including randomized trials, that housing conditions, central heating, tends to lower blood pressure. If you have actually a well-heated and thermal comfort, and again, some of this is randomized trials, so quite a strong evidence. So as housing conditions have improved, so there's a set of factors that broadly go with what you would call development, perhaps early life, perhaps physical environment, perhaps our ability to eat more diverse foods that have had an influence, as had treatment in everything. So I think that's